He's got a great prepared message for us tonight to follow up on his outstanding message that he did a couple of weeks ago. So without further ado, Alfredo's going to come up here and lead us through. And then after that, make sure to grab your angel tree. Come on up, brother.
Yeah. Good evening. So, as we continue in our epic saga of the Exodus account, I'm just very honored that I was able to put my 2 cents into this series. Just talking about the Song of the Sea and how God, with this amazing event, splits Yam Suf, the Red Sea, so that he can emancipate Israel, so they can embark on finding a home for themselves. So thank you. I definitely appreciate it. It was definitely an honor. But the splitting of the Red Sea wasn't just God flexing his muscle. You know, as we learned, it was a much deeper message that God was conveying to not only the indigenous Egyptians, but to the Semites who would become the nation of Israel. So he did it in a manner in which that they would understand. So, and the reason for that is because God wanted to contextualize his kingship through an ancient Egyptian worldview. God wanted to specifically message what he was saying in a manner that these people at that time and that culture would fully understand what he was trying to say. And what we're going to do today, we're going to look at a couple of snapshots throughout the book of Exodus, and we're going to look at how the Egyptians would have perceived what God was doing. Because again, it's not just these powerful acts. There's a message, there's context that they understood because they were the original intended audience. All right? All right, so the first thing we're going to look at is Pharaoh himself, right? The big bad of the Exodus account. Pharaoh is actually a Greek word that is based on an Egyptian word that meant great house. When this word was first used, it referred to the palace of the king and his greatness, not just to the king himself. Now, it's a title. It's not his name. And if you notice, Pharaoh's name is never mentioned in the Exodus. And people will use that point as a way to say that the Exodus isn't really true. Because how are you going to forget the villain of the story's name? Right? Now, think about it. We know Moses' parents. We know his siblings. We know his wife. We know the father-in-law. We even know the midwives. They get a special shout out. So we know the midwives. Of course they knew who Pharaoh was. But why not say his name? Well, it's because Pharaoh has 5 names. Every Pharaoh has 5 names. The royal protocol of an Egyptian pharaoh is the standard naming convention taken by the kings of ancient Egypt. It symbolizes worldly power and holy might, and also acts as a sort of mission statement for the reign of a monarch. Sometimes it even changed during the reign. The full title, consisting of 5 names, did not come into standard usage until the Middle Kingdom, but remained in use as late as the Roman Empire. So the 5 name titles is the Horus name, the Nepti name, the Golden Horus name, the Prenomen name, and the Nomen name. 5 titles. So if we use somebody like, let's say, Thutmose III, this is his whole name. Ready? Horus, mighty bull, arising in Thebes. He of the 2 ladies enduring in kingship like Ra in heaven. Horus, of gold, powerful of strength, sacred of appearance. He of the sedge and the bee, enduring of form and ray, son of Ra, Thutmose, beautiful of forms. That's his name. That's his name. So why wouldn't the writer of Exodus say all this? One, it's a lot of ink for the parchment, right? But more importantly, we're not going to give him all that credit, are we? Because the whole idea is to strip away Pharaoh's power so that Yahweh could be seen as the true king. It is as if somebody says, you know, I'm the Sultan of sneakers, king of kicks, first of all footwear. But in all actuality, you are the manager of Foot Locker. No offense to anybody who works for Foot Locker. It's a noble task. But what I'm saying is, we're not going to give him all that credit. It's like, I'm the great son of Ra. Nah, bro. You're Pharaoh. You're management. So right there, there's a shot purposely not saying all those names. Right? In the papyrus of Turin, in this tale, Isis forms a clay snake with spittle dribbled by the aging sun god, the creator Ra. When the snake bites Ra, only Isis can save him. But she does this only when Ra reveals his sacred name to her. He does this on condition that she reveal it only to our son Horus. This is how Isis becomes mighty in Egypt, by tricking the aging god to tell her his special name, because with that name comes power. Why is that a big deal? Exodus chapter 3, starting in verse 13, Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are going to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. See, when Moses meets Yahweh, there's no tricks. He simply asks him, what's your name? And God tells him so. In fact, he says, go tell everyone my name. So everyone has access to me. There's no secret agenda going on. I want everyone to know who I am. Right? Exodus 4:10. Moses pleaded with the Lord, oh Lord, I'm not very good with words. I've never have been, and not now. Even though you have spoken to me, I get tongue-tied, and my words get tangled. Now, the Egyptian magicians are said to have been eloquent speakers. The Madanek Stela, for example, paints Isis as a word artist. I am Isis, the goddess, the possessor of magic, who performs magic, splendid of speech. So with this understanding, when Moses says, I'm not eloquent in speech, to us in the 21st century, we think of, wow, you know, he's not a really good spokesperson for Israel, but God's still going to use him. Amen. That's great. And that's true. But from the Egyptian side of things, what they saw is Moses pretty stinks as a magician, because you need to be eloquent in speech to cast these spells, right? In fact, you know, we spell our names. We spell words today, right? Because the words carry weight. But in the ancient Near East, there was a supernatural component to words. So if you want a supernatural throwdown against Pharaoh and his team of magicians, Moses is not the guy you're going to pick. He's not good at this. All the more reason God chose him. So that people will know it's not Moses that's casting spells. It's Yahweh showing you his kingship. In the Westcar Papyrus is a tale of a priest who has a wayward wife, finds out his wife is cheating on him with some commoner that works by the Nile. So what he decides to do, he fashions this toy alligator, and he gives it to his servant, and he says to his servant, when this man, this commoner, when you see him leaving my house to bathe in the Nile, throw the toy alligator into the Nile at him. Okay? So the guy, you know, leaves the house, goes to bathe in the Nile, the servant sees it, throws the toy alligator into the Nile, magically becomes a huge alligator, swallows a guy, and goes into the Nile. A couple of days later, that same priest, he's walking with the Pharaoh, and he says, Pharaoh, you're not going to believe what I did. This is amazing. You want to see something? He's like, yeah. Goes to the Nile, summons the alligator vomits the guy. He's like, you see this dude? This guy's been cheating with my wife. He's like, you're kidding. He's like, no, he's right here. And he's scared of the alligator. And the priest says, no, it's okay. He grabs the alligator by the tail, and it magically becomes a toy again. Says, okay, so if he cheated, you know, have at it. Throws the alligator back into the water, becomes a real alligator, swallows the guy, goes back into the Nile. right? This was a popular tale in Egypt, that these priests have this power of making these toy alligators and making them into real ones. These are two seals depicting individual, most likely a magician priest, holding two crocodiles by the tail, one in each hand. So the priests were known to handle these fierce sea creatures, even make them out of inanimate objects. Why is that important? Well, Exodus chapter 7, starting in verse 10. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down their staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. So when Moses throws the staff, and it becomes a serpent, they know what's going on. This is something that the Egyptian priests can do. And also, if you notice, it's not just a couple of magicians, right? It says the wise men, sorcerers, and the Egyptian magician. There's a whole crew of like Dr. Strange guys against Moses and Aaron. So there's a whole slew of them. And it says here that Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. So imagine reimagine the battle now. I know we love Prince of Egypt, right? But that's not really the case. There was this huge throwdown. It was a winner-take-all type of situation, right? In fact, the word snake in the Hebrew is tanim, which comes from the word tan, which means serpent, dragon, or sea monster. And since Egyptian magicians loved alligators, I deposit that the fight was between these magical alligators that they made with these staffs. And Aaron's alligator took out everybody else's. So an Egyptian magician was a highly literate practitioner whose physical activities acquired non-literal ritual nuances, and to whom the pictorial characters of the Egyptian script added a bond between the written word and the object which it embodies. We may see the snake as the embodiment of the Egyptian word for statement, written as a serpent, a word that appears in Egyptian magical texts as a synonym for spell. Therefore, in the eyes of the Egyptian magicians, the events of Exodus 7, verses 13 and 18, bore an additional and more subtle nuance of eating one's magical words. When we keep in mind that words were believed to possess a power all their own, it became clear that from the first encounter, Aaron's devouring staff signaled the death knell to the conjurer's abilities. Next up, frogs. There is no parallel to the second plague of frogs in ancient Egyptian literature, but it's noteworthy that Heket, the goddess of life and fertility, is represented by a frog in Egyptian art. The importance of this point is realized in the following interplay between Pharaoh Moses and Aaron. The former requests that the two brothers pray to Yahweh simply to remove the frogs, with the implication that they would return to the Nile. But the end result is not only the death of the frogs, but the piles of rotting frog corpses so that the land stank. Once symbols of the goddess of life, the frogs now embody the stench of death. Again, you see the contextual, he's contextualizing they understand what's going on here. They're slowly stripping away the powers of all these different deities, right? In Exodus 8, starting in verse 16, then the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground. And throughout the land of Egypt, the dust will become gnats. They did this when Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the ground. Gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. So we get a 2-for-1 deal here. Now, if you are familiar with, well, you might not be, but familiar with the magic of these priests, they believe that most of their spells can only work with sand, because sand created the universe, which I can understand why they would say that, because wherever they turn to is nothing but sand, right? So most of the spells dealt with using a certain amount of sand. But what does Moses do? He makes the sand into gnats. The number one resource for spell casting has been taken away from them. Okay? When he makes the sand into gnats. The gnats now infest their bodies as well. And why is that a problem? Well, Herodias tells us that their priests shave their whole body every other day, that no lice or aught else that is foul may infect them in their service of their gods. So when these gnats attacking their body now is polluted. It's not worthy to go into the temple. No temple, no gods. No gods, no power. So if you notice, this is the last time we hear about these magicians in the Exodus account, because they've been rendered inert by the sand becoming gnats. All right? Next up, Pharaoh's hardened heart. Right? It's a term that we see used quite a bit in Exodus. What you're seeing here is known as the judgment scene of what's called the Prep Em Heru, which is the book of the dead. The pharaohs believe that they can't take it with them to the afterlife if you have the right combination of magical spells. So what you would do is you would go through these different gates, and each gate was secured by a different god. And when you see another god, you will confess something that you didn't do. Like, I have not sinned. I have not lied. I have not cheated anyone. And you keep going. And it kind of looked like most of your video games that you saw in the 80s. You know, you got these different boards. At the end of every board, there's a boss, right? It was pretty much like that. And then when you get to the end, you get this balance where you have to face the goddess Ma'at. And Ma'at will put the feather of truth on one side of the scale and put this heart scarab that represents your heart on the other side. If it was well balanced, you get to go to heaven. If your heart's too heavy, you get eaten up by this hybrid crocodile lion thing that's on the side right there. Now, funny enough, we happen to have plenty of these heart scarabs. Now, on the back of these scarabs is a spell. This is the spell. He says, "Oh, my heart of my mother, oh, my heart of my mother, my heart of my different ages, do not stand as a witness. Do not oppose me in the tribunal. Do not show your hostility against me before the keeper of the balance. For you are my ka, which is in my body, the protector who causes my limbs to go healthy. Go forth for yourself to the good place to which we hasten. Do not cause our name to stink. To the entourage who makes men in heaps, what is good for us is good for the judge. May the heart stretch, i.e. be happy at the verdict. Do not speak lies in the presence of God. Behold, you are distinguished, existing as a justified one." What is he telling the heart to do? Don't snitch on me, man. I'm trying to get in. I know I lied to these other guys, but they don't know that. It's me and you, right? It's me and you, me and the heart. It's, we got to get over here. So they rigged the game, right? But what's funny is the word for harden in Hebrew is kazak, which is to grow stout, rigid, hard, with the idea of perversity. So think about all the ways Pharaoh treated the Israelites. I'll let you go. Change my mind. I'll let you go. Change my mind. He was being deceitful, wasn't he? He was lying, wasn't he? So according to his theology, he's disqualified from going to heaven. So when they read that, it raised a flag. It's like, this guy's not going to make it. Forget Yahweh's theology. By his standard, he's not going to make it. Next up, the eye of Ra and the destruction of mankind. Hathor went into hot pursuit of the men, slaughtering them indiscriminately. She had taken the form of the lioness Sekhmet and began her destruction in the town of Hensu. For 3 days, Hathor Sekhmet killed and drank the blood of men. She had become bloodthirsty. And although avenging her father was an important mission for her, it had turned into a rampage. All of mankind was about to be wiped out. At this point, Ra began to feel sorry for them and realized he didn't want them destroyed completely. But Sekhmet's frenzy was unstoppable even by the gods. She could not be summoned back with reason or order. She was bent on killing all men drinking their blood. The gods decided the only way to get her back was to trick her. While she was asleep, they mixed beer with the red juice or red pigment and spilled it over the land. When she woke, she thought this red liquid was blood and drank it. Dizzy with beer, her rage and bloodthirst calmed, and she became much more docile. She forgot about the destruction, and the rest of mankind was saved. This is something that was taught in Egypt. Now, Exodus 12, starting in verse 12, on that same night, I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn of both people and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. So unlike Sekhmet, right, this actually happened. God said, I will be the avenging one, not Sekhmet. And I'm not going to be drunk. You know, I have something that I need to show you. But he takes a popular folklore and subverts it to convey his kingship. Because, once again, God contextualized his kingship through an ancient Egyptian worldview. But he does it with a M. Night Shyamalan plot twist. Right? He talks in a manner which they understand, but at the end, he tweaks it a little bit. So they could see, but there's a difference here. Yeah, it's similar to what you've known, but there's a difference here. Because I'm different. And you need to see that. And not only do we see God doing that throughout Exodus, we see Paul do it as well in the New Testament. Paul's address in Acts chapter 17, 22 to 31 is often considered a paradigm for cross-worldview evangelism. For it depicts the apostle translating his gospel message into a vernacular of his audience. In other words, he restates the good news in terms that maintain common ground where a similarity of viewpoints is at hand, but retains the distinctiveness of his message on points that allow for no compromise. Because if you read that chapter, Paul never quotes the Torah or the Tanakh. But he does quote a couple of pagan poets because he knows his audience. If he used to step up with "Thus saith the Lord," it's a wrap. It's a problem. We're not going nowhere, right? It's like I gotta speak their language. I gotta make this message make sense to them. So I gotta say things that they understand. But here comes that twist at the end, right? We see God do that not only in Exodus but throughout the Old Testament. We see Jesus doing that throughout the parables. We see the apostles do that throughout the New Testament. And we need to see that being done by ourselves in this church. It's your relevance, not your eloquence, that's needed to convey the gospel. Right? It's your relevance, not your eloquence, that's needed to convey the gospel. All right, so let's get together in our groups, and thank you for your time.